Hi everyone, my name is Honeybee, and today we're going to be discussing Death of a Unicorn, which came out this year, 2025, directed by Alex Sharfman. Now, this movie follows Elliot, a lawyer, and his teenage daughter Ridley on their trip to the remote estate of Elliot's boss, Odell Leopold. Along the way, they accidentally hit a unicorn with their car, which is, of course, an event that immediately shatters the boundary between ordinary reality and the dark fantasy that we're about to see. The wounded creature is taken to the Leopold estate where it becomes the focal point of greed and corruption. As the Leopold family realizes that the unicorn's horn possesses healing properties, the situation spirals out of control. The estate becomes kind of a grotesque laboratory where the unicorn is studied and abused and harvested, but also the operations center of the sales of unicorn products. We see them cutting into the unicorn to sell its blood. We see them powdering the horn to make unicorn drugs that they snort. We see the meat being eaten. We see them drinking literally the blood. And as this happens, it is healing the various diseases, everything from some acne to cancer. The Odell, who was said to have cancer and was dying, and that's why Elliot went up there, is healed by a blood transfusion of the unicorn blood. And so from there, as the movie progresses, Elliot struggles with his moral compass, which is caught between protecting his daughter and appeasing his employer, Odell. Ridley, his daughter, on the other hand, forms an emotional, almost like a spiritual bond with the unicorn after holding its horn, and really starts empathizing with its pain and what it's being forced to go through. Meanwhile, Odell and his family see the creature only as a business opportunity. Belinda revels in potential profits, contacting everyone that they know, all the rich people they know, because they realize they have a limited supply. And so they're selling unicorn products at exorbitant prices immediately as a cure for everything. It sounds like snake oil, but in this universe, it works. Now, while Shepard and the rest of his family escalate the cruelty. The film has some moments of absurd comedy and shocking gore, from Ridley trying to shield the unicorn to grotesque scenes of humans getting high while also drunk and high on, normal drugs. Anyway, the violence intensifies as the unicorn begins to fight back and even summons a herd of other unicorns to help it fight. Shepard faces a terrifying confrontation in the estate library as he's stalked and attacked by the creature. Belinda meets one of the film's most grotesque, gory deaths when she's eviscerated on a pool table. And this scene really stuck with me. I thought it was really great. You don't see a lot of stuff like that. And the framing of the shot, she's bleeding out on this pool table. It was perfect. It's one of the only memorable shots from the movie. We also see the unicorns tossing one of the scientists, actually two of the unicorns tossing a scientist back and forth, chewing her, pulling her apart, and stabbing her with their horns as she flies through the air. And through all of this, Ridley's relationship with the young unicorn remains central, which stands in stark contrast to the greed around her. Now, as for some of the plot and the message, themes, and symbolism, at its heart, the movie is an allegory about greed, capitalism, and humanity's impulse to commodify everything. The unicorn is a multifaceted symbol: purity, rarity, and an untouchable sense of wonder, which we see whenever Ridley grabs the horn. Yet in the hands of the Leopolds, it becomes a product to dissect, sell, and snort. The film plays out a bit like a satirical morality tale where people are questioning whether the idea of reverence, can last in today's world where everything is exploited. Unfortunately, one of the things I noticed about this movie was that this is kind of your paint by numbers, eat the rich, capitalism is bad movies, right? We had a couple of these like The Menu, and it's been a whole genre that's been popping up quite a bit. This movie, while I did enjoy watching some of it, is very ham-fisted. It just hits you with the message over and over again in multiple scenes, and I think it could have done with a little more subtlety. But that said, when we come to the performances, we see Jenna Ortega shine as Ridley. She does an incredible job balancing her characteristic sarcasm with some genuine vulnerability from the character. And that said, when are we going to stop seeing Jenna Ortega playing teenagers? She's 22 now. She's getting to the age where, all right, I mean, I know back in the 90s we had 30-year-olds playing teenagers regularly, but at this point, it's starting to get old, right? Let's see teenagers play teenagers, or at least, older people, right? Any case, is another great actor who shines in the role of Shepard, one of those characters that you love to hate, right? Like Joffrey from Game of Thrones, awful character, could not stand him in person, amazing acting. Now, with that, Will Poulter, he also adds some charm. Now, Paul Rudd, this wasn't his greatest performance, unfortunately. I wish that we could have seen a bit more of Paul Rudd doing his usual quality. I don't know if he just wasn't enthusiastic about the script or if he felt like he just wasn't into the movie, but he didn't really seem to be giving everything in this one. Yeah. I wish I could say more favorable things because I like Paul Rudd. This just wasn't his strongest work. With that said, the dialogue in the film, like I said earlier, it veers between sharp satire, which actually could maybe be made into something, and awkward exposition, which is kind of reflecting the tonal clash at the core of the movie. Because on the one hand, it wants to be a horror and it wants to be a comedy. We've seen many horror comedies work, but usually they have to lean into either the horror or the comedy. Right? This is one where they tried to do both all the way, and it just doesn't work. Don't know what the film's going for. The horror scenes aren't quite scary enough, except for a couple really good gory ones, right? The horror scenes aren't scary enough, and the humor scenes aren't really funny enough. So it kind of fails on both fronts. With that said, visually, the film is competently shot with moments of flair, but it doesn't really establish its own identity as a movie. It opens strong, right? Where we see the Canadian wilderness, there's wide shots, and even a bit in the mansion, we see some wide shots of the mansion that really helps set the scene and gives it the feel that we're looking for. It's a sense of place. But that sense of place quickly disappears as it's just kind of random scenes, random places. We're on a lawn, we're in a small room. We see a couple of things that like they have a sense of place, like the laboratory they construct inside the mansion, but it doesn't it's a generic laboratory that you could see in any movie, right? So you don't see the sense of place as strongly in this one. Now, the ending of the movie attempts to tie together all these themes of greed and innocence and exploitation, but it falters in execution, right? We see the greed kill Shepard as he's trying to eke out that last bit of value from the unicorn. We see Ridley offer herself, and actually Paul Rudd, we see both of them offer themselves and their lives in service of the unicorns. But it's really stereotypical. You can see it coming from a mile away. As soon as the ending scene begins, you know what's about to happen after the massacre. But the massacre being when the unicorns attack everyone. Now, it is interesting that the young unicorn died, but again, it's brought back. We can see that coming from a mile away, right? So it's really not a great ending, especially because then we switch to another scene where they're driving in the car and a herd of unicorns sees Paul Rudd and Jenna Ortega in the back of the police car, and the unicorns push the police car into a lake. How are they going to get out of a police car? You can't. I believe they're handcuffed. The doors are going to be locked because they're in custody. And so we just saw the characters drown. However, this is contradicted a little bit because during the end credits, there were some tapestries that played a role in the movie, a series of tapestries. And during the end credits, we see this same series of tapestries rolling by. And the very last tapestry does show Jenna Ortega and Paul Rudd swimming away from a car in a lake. So it is implied that they survive, but it's one of those things where it's like, I don't really know how. So anyway, the whole thing just felt predictable and really characteristic of the movie as a whole. Predictable, slower than necessary, ham-fisted in the messaging. Anyway, it did have an unusual premise, which I liked. It seems to be kind of like a weird mix between Jurassic Park and the Leprechaun series, if you're familiar with those. Filming took place primarily in Hungary, with the estate setting was brought to life, where they tried to bring it to life with the lavish interiors and the gothic exteriors. Practical effects were used a little bit, but the CGI was, pretty heavily relied upon for the unicorns. Now, there was a bit of improv as well. We see Jenna Ortega and Paul Rudd, as well as a bit of Anthony Carrigan. They're all kind of trying to bring in a bit of improv to liven the script, and I believe that's why Paul Rudd may not have been fully engaged with this product, is because they took a lot of liberty with the script, right? Which is good. That livened it, that made it a bit better, but at the same time, it goes to show how they knew that what they were making wasn't going to be amazing, right? And then finally, we're going to dive a little bit into the LGBT intersection with this movie. Now, the movie doesn't say anything directly about the LGBTQ community, but I do believe that we can pull out themes that are important and relevant to the LGBT community from anything. With this, unicorns have often stood for rarity, uniqueness, and the beauty of being different, which are, of course, qualities embraced by the queer community. In this film, however, the unicorn is feared, commodified, and ultimately destroyed by those who wish to control it. Read symbolically, this mirrors how mainstream society has exploited and impacted queer culture, profiting off queer aesthetics while marginalizing queer lives. We can see this every June during Pride Month when all the corporations come out. And that's not to knock any corporation who supports Pride because we need all the support we can get. But you can see, of course, that a lot of these organizations, especially during the Obama and Biden eras, were doing so not genuinely, if that makes sense. Like, they would, do their thing for June, and then the rest of the year, they didn't care, right? In any case, the metaphor is unavoidable even if the film doesn't touch on these issues directly. The unicorns struggle for survival, the ability to exist, the ability to live in its home unbothered resonates with the LGBT fight for authenticity and safety in a world that is trying to control us and keep us in the closet. In here, in its queer allegory, the movie flirts with something deeper, even though it really doesn't really commit to it. With that, Death of a Unicorn is a film bursting with ideas, part horror spectacle, part capitalist satire, but it never really comes together into something great. The gory set pieces, when they occur, there's really just two scenes that I can think of, but they're very entertaining. I would watch them again. I wouldn't watch the movie as a whole again, but I might go back and watch those sequences while I'm editing this. At times, the performances are excellent, but the predictability of the core story, the clumsy messaging, the uneven tone really prevent it from reaching its full potential. The film is unforgettable in its uniqueness, but frustrating because what it could have been. And that wraps it up for today. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button and like if you enjoyed what I had to say. Leave a comment down below if you want, because I want to hear what you thought about the movie. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.